For those of you that don't know me, I'm Nathan Kelber, one of the organizers of Network Detroit and tomorrow's Great Lakes That Camp. I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker. It's quite an honor to have him here. Ethan Watrall is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology and associate director of Matrix, the Center for Humane Arts, Letters, and Social Sciences Online at Michigan State University. In addition, Ethan is director of the Cultural Heritage Informatics Initiative and the Cultural Heritage Informatics Cultural Heritage Informatics Field School, that's a mouthful, at Michigan State University. He is PI of the NEH-funded Redland, Blackland Teaching Ancient Egyptian History Through Game-Based Learning project, as well as co-PI of the NEH-funded Pox in the City, a digital role-playing game for the Ethnohistory of Medicine project. In addition, he is co-editor of Archaeology 2.0, New Tools for Communication and Collaboration. If you're a game scholar, like me, you are likely to be familiar with his blog, Play the Past, which is dedicated to thoughtfully exploring and discussing the intersection of cultural heritage and games. All of this is to say that Ethan is an outstanding scholar in his field and other people's fields as well. I first met Ethan at Great Lakes That Camp in 2011, sort of. Up to that point, I had only known him, like so many great DH scholars, as a Twitter handle. If you're one of his more than 3,000 followers on Twitter, you know he has an alter ego, uniquely inflected with archaeological humor. Captain Primate. Now, if you aren't the type of twit that tweets on Twitter, it is worth noting that on Twitter, it works on a system of following. Before you can read Captain Primate's tweets, you have to agree to follow him. Now, following the captain of the primates requires a certain humbleness. To follow the captain of the monkeys, you have to admit you're kind of a monkey too. Let me share with you some of his monkey business. Here's how he described his presentation for us last night on Twitter.
So you gotta like...
So there's you guys. There's me here is Ethan, and this talk is the fire hose. They look like they're having fun. I hope you all brought your bathing suits. Part of what makes Ethan such an excellent scholar and teacher is his ability to speak with intelligence and humor on so many topics. His body of work crosses so many areas: cultural heritage informatics, digital archaeology, game studies, and also digital humanities. Yet he remains one of the most influential organizers and voices, in digital humanities. As an archaeologist, Ethan has sometimes disavowed the title digital humanist. Yet he remains one of the most influential organizers and voices regarding the digital humanities. Indeed, his foundational Great Lakes That Camp was my inspiration for Network Detroit. So when Melinda asked me, who should we get to do the keynote, Ethan was the first and natural choice. Before Ethan begins, I want to thank him, not just for his wonderful talk, which I'm sure will follow.
Yeah, wait, don't sell it, you know.
But I'd like to thank him personally for inspiring me as a scholar. Network Detroit would not exist if I had not met Captain Primate. And it is an honor to continue what he started in 2010 with Great Lakes That Camp tomorrow on LTU's campus. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Ethan Watrall.
Thank you. That is a frighteningly high bar to live up to. So thank you very much, everybody, for sticking around. I mean, it's after dinner and it's a little later in the day and people are sleepy and want to take a nap. So I'm glad that you agreed to stay and hang around. Many thanks to the organizers and Nathan and Melinda specifically. Thanks to everyone for great conversations today. This is the organizers should be absolutely applauded for a great conference, and that's especially important because this is the first time out, right? This is the first time this conference has ever been given. And that's, the first year is usually kind of the debugging year. And this was really, really good. So yeah, absolutely. All right, so when Nathan originally invited me, I'm like, yeah, I want to do a keynote. That's awesome. Because, some of you may know, I have 3 aspirations in my academic career. One, I want to do a keynote, okay? Because lots of academic talks, all that kind of stuff. Never given a keynote before. 2, I want to be a delegate to somewhere. I don't care what it is, and I don't care what the topic is, but I want to be a delegate. 3, at a conference, I want to be brought up on the stage like Apollo Creed in Rocky II with James Brown singing in the background. So unless they've dug up James Brown, we'll just have to check off Keynote from my academic list. So thank you very much for having me. So the topic of the keynote today is towards a model of openness in digital cultural heritage. And I'm actually gonna start off the talk on a little bit of a down note, but I promise you we're gonna go up from there. So on January 11th, 2013, Aaron Swartz, it's pictured right here, took his own life at the age of 26. Before he committed suicide, Swartz faced extreme criminal charges for attempting to mass download scholarly journals from JSTOR on the network of MIT. His tragic death still reverberates around the campus or around the community of activists who value sharing of knowledge and a free and open internet. His case serves to illustrate the very, very high legal, ethical, and cultural stakes involved in the debate of openness within the scholarly world. Now, his death certainly was not the sort of the opening event in the battle for openness. There's been a lot of discussion about openness within the scholarly community and beyond before Aaron Swartz took his own life, but it very much serves as a rather depressing point in this discussion. So, within the sort of the context of openness, we can look sort of more generally to the NIH, for instance, the National Institute of Health, who led the way in the scholarly community in health and health sciences and medicine to not only encourage scholars to practice sort of more open scholarship, but also require scholars to practice more open scholarship. All funded work by the NIH has to be published in an openly accessible format within 12 months of the completion of the grant. And that has led rise to things like this. This is the PLOS, which is the Public Library of Science, which is a platform for open access publication. And even the White House has got in on the action. This is the Open Government Initiative, which is essentially a platform for open government data. The problem is that, and this is in honor of being in Detroit, the problem is that these issues are only starting to enter into the cultural heritage space, whether by individual cultural heritage scholars or cultural heritage institutions. So they're still very, very much in play and up for debate within the sort of the broad cultural heritage, the broad domain of cultural heritage. So that's the serious stuff, and this is where it gets a little less serious. We all know Charles Darwin, right? Now, Charles Darwin is asking me a question, or Chuck D, as I like to call him. The father of modern biological evolution, international beard aficionado, And a dude who I can only assume, if he had been alive today, would have been in favor of open scholarship and openness in general. So I'm gonna answer Charles's question. You know, what exactly is openness? Now, the challenge is that the idea of openness impacts different domains in different kinds of ways. You can see it manifest in all of these spaces and used in all of these sort of contexts. Open scholarship, open culture, open access, open data, open publication, open learning, open source. And all of them are sort of slightly different, and depending on where they manifest in these spaces. But I want to pull it back a little bit. And this is the definition of openness that I like the best. Basically, the principle that knowledge should be shared and spread freely, and the growth of knowledge should come from developing, altering, or enriching already existing works on the basis of sharing and collaboration without restriction. And that pretty much covers all of that, those lines on the previous slide. And we're going to use this as kind of a foundation. I'm laying this down for a foundation in this talk. Now, in the world of open source and open software, the idea of openness is often framed using this metaphor. And this is actually a really, really good metaphor. Free as in beer and free as in speech. Show of hands, who's heard this before? Okay, that's good. I like, that's a nice number of hands. All right, so free as in beer, which is also referred to as gratis, means free of charge, price of zero, free in the sense that some good of service is supplied without payment, even though it may have value. The beer's got value, but it would be given to you without price. Now, within the context of scholarly openness, it means making things available without monetary cost. Usually online, but not always. The other side of this is free as in speech. So the state of freeing, being free, libre, liberty, having freedom. Within this context, libre usually suggests the freedom to modify and to reuse. Specifically, that there are no copyright barriers to modifying, developing, building upon, or reusing a creator's ideas or finding once they have been published, as long as the creator and published source are credited. So, this is a really important way of framing this idea of openness, using sort of that very general definition that I provided in the previous slide, as well as this model, free as in beer, free as in speech, gratis, and libre. All right, so what exactly is the point of this talk? There's two things that I want to do. First thing I want to do is I want to talk about what is open scholarship. And I've already talked about openness a little bit, sort of a generic sense, but I want to talk about it within the context of the scholarly world. Now, the thing that you need to realize is when I use the word scholar, I use it very, very generally. Oftentimes when people say scholars, they're meaning specifically professors. I'm not. I'm using it to refer to anyone who is, engaging in scholarly pursuits. So those are students, those are librarians, those are archivists, those are museum people, those are faculty, those are technologists, okay? So the word scholar is very, very general for me. So I want to talk about sort of scholarship or openness within the scholarly context, and also what's at stake. Why is openness important? So what? Why should we care about this? Second thing I want to do, which I'm going to spend the majority of my time doing, is suggest a series of strategies for heritage scholars, as well as heritage institutions, to embrace a more open perspective. And this is really important to me. I am often very, very frustrated by talks that bemoan the state of something, and how horrible something is, whatever that something may be, but then don't turn around and provide any kind of concrete or constructive responses to that. So I'll spend a fair amount of time saying, okay, we've talked about, why should we care about openness within this context. Here are some things we can do about it to embrace a more open approach to the work that we do within this cultural heritage context. All right, these are my experiences. This is from my perspective, right? Most of what I am talking about is sort of directly from my experience. Some stuff that's immediately directly from my experience. And there are a lot of other voices in this space that have a lot of other interesting things to say. So, that's important to remember. The other thing about this talk is, fair warning, I'm going to wander a little bit. There's going to be a lot of, hey, that thing's interesting, let's go over and talk about that in this talk. But at the end, I'm going to gather up the threads and we'll sort of, bring them together. And like Nathan brought up earlier, this is the talk. Now, this was actually the last slide I put in because last night as I was looking over my talk, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of stuff here. So that's the fire hose. And you can drink deeply of the fire hose. Some of it's good, and some of it, hopefully you'll get something out of. And then also the sort of last warning is this. I'm not going to lie. I'm an archaeologist. There's going to be a lot of archaeology in this talk. Not all, right? We're all very interdisciplinary, but that's where I come from, and it's sort of my frame of reference. Also, the work that goes on in digital archaeology is actually a little bit out in front of this space. So there's some sort of interesting things that are happening in the world of digital archaeology that I'd like to sort of introduce to you guys that illustrate and support these ideas of openness within the sphere of cultural heritage. All right, and here's Charles Darwin. He's back again. So, asking us, why should we care? Right? Why should we care about openness? I mean, I could easily say to you, walk in this room and say, open is good, all right, let's talk about strategies. I'm kind of doing that anyways. I mean, let's be completely honest about it. But the onus is on me to, at the very least, kind of outline why should we care? Why is this something that's important? And, why am I talking to you about this as opposed to, something else entirely? So what I want to do is I want to go through three sort of general so whats, and then we'll get on to talking about the strategies. And again, these are all from my perspective. There are lots of other so whats, but these are the ones that I find that sort of resonate the most with me. So first off is that openness is an issue of sustainability. Now, the word sustainability is very, very popular in lots of different contexts, and it has importance within sort of openness in cultural heritage. All right, so what do I mean by that? So first thing is that closed and gated systems create a single point of failure and loss. You put data or information or knowledge in a closed system. What happens when that closed system shuts down? Well, maybe you could get your data out or your information out or your content out. Maybe you can't get it out. Single point of failure, single point of loss. What happens when the proprietary software you've paid a lot of money to use and invested a lot of energy in integrating into your institution in the workflow? What happens when they go out of business or change their pricing structure? You are essentially left high and dry. So it's a single point of failure, closed systems, gated systems. Now, this idea that draconian pricing by for-profit publishing entities makes scholarly access to research increasingly difficult is something we're seeing a lot these days. And we're seeing it within the context of scholarly publishers. For-profit publishers make this is important, for-profit publishers. And I'm squarely pointing my finger at the Elsevier's and the Wiley Blackwells and the Taylor and Francis, which are multi-billion-dollar multinational corporations. They make these billions of dollars off the back of free academic labor, writing, organizational work, reviewing. As a scholar, as a faculty member, this is what I do. I publish, I do research. When I submit and I do that for free, I'm not, the journal isn't paying me to do it. I submit it, someone in my community reviews it for free, Journal doesn't pay them. Someone in my community is editing the journal. Journal doesn't pay them. So essentially, these for-profit publishers are making billions of dollars on the back of free academic labor, and then they sell back the products of this free academic labor to those same institutions for incredible prices. The end result of this cycle is that many institutions, many libraries, many universities, and certainly individual scholars cannot get access to work that is publicly funded for the most part. They simply cannot get access to it. So this cycle essentially impacts the sustainability of the scholarly work. And the final thing is that closed information, closed data that is not accessible impacts and jeopardizes the advancement of research and scholarship. If you do not have access to the data and the information and the work within your field, you cannot advance your field. So closed systems and closed data and closed information do not allow for the advancement of scholarship. So openness is an issue of sustainability. Openness is also an issue of professional ethics. This is a prickly one for a lot of scholars because I'm directly challenging their professional ethics. And that sometimes doesn't sit particularly well with a lot of my colleagues. All right. So when you are open, you encourage proper attribution, you recognize contribution, and you mitigate theft and abuse. If you work transparently, you ensure equitable attribution. If everyone knows what you're doing and everyone knows who your collaborators are, you can't screw someone over. You can't lie about their contributions or your contributions. Scholarship in the open also protects against abuse of students. I mean, there are lots of situations in which mentors, advisors, or supervisors will take the research of a student or an employee and claim it for themselves. That happens all the time, every day. If you work transparently and you work openly, that can't happen, or there is a much reduced chance of that happen. So it's an issue of professional ethics. If you work openly, you are making the result of mostly publicly funded work publicly available. We already talked about this before within the context of sustainability. A huge amount of work that we do as within an institutional context or as individuals is publicly funded. As such, it must be publicly available. So it is an issue of professional ethics. And finally, when you work openly and you embrace an open model of scholarship, you are supporting a system that provides access to those who cannot get access themselves for whatever reason. And the final so what here is open is an issue of better scholarship. This is usually the easiest sell, quite honestly, that you being an open scholar encourages better scholarship, and it allows for other people to do better scholarship as well. So, if you publish your data or your content or your work or your collections openly, it allows for these silos. I mean, knowledge exists in all sorts of silos, disciplinary silos, systemic silos. But if you publish it openly, there's a greater chance of being able to federate or aggregate that knowledge, therefore being able to do things you might not have been able to do before. Openness also encourages discovery, because when you publish stuff openly, on the web, and that's kind of the subtext here, is putting stuff online. The web is a giant discovery engine, and when you put stuff openly on the web, people are going to find it that might not have found it before, and we're going to sort of come back to this idea a little bit, which supports and encourages interdisciplinarity, because people who you might not necessarily engage with on a regular professional basis, because we go to different conferences, we publish in different journals, they're going to find your stuff, and there are going to be points of sort of commonality and synergy there. And finally, openness is good because it facilitates novel transformation of data, information, and knowledge. The vast majority of the most interesting works of visualization, for example, is done with open data. It's not done with closed data. And it's oftentimes done with multiple data sources that are all open. You take this, you combine it with this, you put it with this, and you make something really interesting, transformative works. And that's very, very difficult to do with closed systems and closed scholarships. So those are my so whats. Those are my why should we care. It's an issue of sustainability, it's an issue of professional ethics, and it's an issue of better scholarship. And like I said previously, there are others, but those are the ones that I find important and I personally find meaningful. So on to the sort of practical portion of this keynote. The strategies that institutions and individuals can pursue in order to embrace a more open approach to their work. Now this is where the kind of both the fire hose and the wandering come into play a little bit. I'm going to jump around a lot and sort of cover a lot of different things, but there is connective tissue between all of these. First thing I want to talk about is the technical side of things. And I've got to be honest with you, this is the easiest stuff. Of these two, the technical is the easiest. The most difficult is the scholarly culture and institutional policy. And for those who might not be quite as technically experienced, you're saying, no, that's not true. The technical stuff is harder. Trust me, the cultural stuff is way, way, way harder. You can learn to program, but you can't, or it's very hard to force disciplinary cultural changes on an institutional or sort of professional level. So we're going to start off with the easy stuff. And some of this is immediately attainable. And some of it actually, quite frankly, resonates with some of the things that have been spoken about today, as well as the some of the things that were spoken about in the plenary session. First one, top of the list, most important thing, build for and on the open web. Absolutely vital. This means choosing open web technologies that are standardized by not-for-profit bodies, technologies that are not proprietary, like CSS or HTML or JavaScript, for instance. It also means that Flash is bad. Absolutely, positively, unequivocally, stop using Flash. Now, yes. The irony of this is I'm a dude who wrote 4 books on Flash back in the day. So I loved Flash. I thought it was awesome. And back in the day, it was good. You know, it allowed us, especially in the museum space, it allowed us to do kinds of things that we couldn't do previously. Very, very rich media, very interactive things. But as the web has matured, certainly technically speaking, we can do most of that stuff with standards-based technology now. Plus, it isn't proprietary, it isn't closed. The standards that Flash are based on are not, or that HTML and CSS and JavaScript, as well as many other standards-based technologies, are not controlled by a single company and beholden to their whims. So again, for the love of God, please stop using Flash. Now, by extension, You need to develop for and on the mobile web. Mobile, geospatial, place-based work is very popular right now. It's certainly popular within the cultural heritage space. Museums are really, really excited, and rightly so, with what mobile can do for them. But the allure of the app is undeniable. And so the app is, you can say, we've got an app, as opposed to saying, well, we've got a mobile website. What sounds sexier? Well, yeah, okay, the app. I mean, let's be honest about that. Or download the app from the iTunes Store or Android Play. You can also monetize an app, where it's very, very difficult, or it's more difficult, to monetize a mobile website that is living on the open web. So I'm going to be the first to admit that the allure of the app is undeniable. But you really, when you're thinking about mobile development, you really, really, really need to think about building for and on the mobile web, which is essentially the same as the open web. It's the same thing. Now, I have an admission. I'm going to own up to something because, we're all speaking on it. We're all friends here, right? This is my app. I succumbed to the lure of the app. It's called MS Museum. It's a cultural heritage application that we built for the MSU campus. And I made the conscious choice not to build a mobile website. I made the conscious choice to build an iOS app at that, which is ironic because I'm an Android user. So this is hard. This is hard, okay? But I've given us something for all of us to strive for, and we'll strive together. Now, the next thing I want to encourage people to do is, and this is equally hard, is beyond the spaces we build on the open web and the technologies that we use, open web technologies, there's also something to be said about the infrastructures that we rely upon. And I would very much like to encourage institutions especially to build and manage their own cyber infrastructure. By doing this, you control the hardware, you control the software, you make choices that align with your own institutional ethics and ideologies, open source, open services, ethical software. But I'm going to be the first to admit that this is much more difficult than the whole app mobile web thing, because this costs a lot of money. This is very, very resource intensive. Not only do you have to buy hardware, buy software, build the systems, all that kind of stuff, but you have to have people who can do it. So in a resource-poor environment, which scholars live in now, and cultural heritage scholars live in even more than that, this may be completely out of people's reach. However, even if it's immediately out of reach and I can't build a server room, maybe you can think in very creative ways. For instance, teaming up with a bunch of allied institutions within your area to build, pool your resources, to build servers and cyber infrastructure that you control. And it doesn't have to be like this, racks and racks and racks of machines, but something that you control, you build, you make decisions about the software and about the hardware that will meet your needs. Sort of following a little bit sort of on the tails of that is sort of closely related to building and managing your cyber infrastructure. A lot of scholars, certainly, and cultural heritage institutions who don't have those resources, who don't have the servers, who don't have the systems administrators, are turning to cloud-based services, software as services, stuff that is given out freely, and you're like, Pinterest is free. I can sign up and I can start putting my museum's object of the day on. Doesn't cost me anything. Lots of people use Pinterest. So that what they're essentially doing is they're replacing their own, or they're trading their own cyber infrastructure by one that's on the cloud and a software as service that is controlled by someone else. A for-profit institution, company, a startup, whatever it may be. But what happens when Pinterest, for instance, starts filtering content that they find objectionable? Say one day Pinterest changes its terms of service and says that we will not allow nudity on the site. Okay, that sort of makes sense. But what happens if you are a gallery that has paintings in it with nudes? Your stuff gets filtered off the site. So what is happening is you are beholden to their changes in this case, in their end user licensing agreement. Or what happens when WordPress starts charging for its platform and you've built your entire infrastructure on WordPress? What do? Do you start shelling out money to them? Do you then try to find something else when you've invested all sorts of time, effort, and energy in this platform? What happens when Google Maps, and a lot of people are using Google Mapping platform for geospatial stuff, what happens when they change their terms of service? What happens when they start charging for map calls, which they do now, which they didn't in the past? Here's an interesting example of this. Yesterday, I saw this go by on Twitter. This is Colleen Morgan. Colleen Morgan's an archaeologist in the UK. She tweeted this. I just realized that Flickr broke tag-specific RSS for WordPress.com. Ugh. So essentially what she had done is her WordPress site was reaching into Flickr and pulling out images based on specific RSS. And she was displaying images on her WordPress site that are being pulled dynamically out of Flickr. When she initially set that up, it worked perfectly fine. But Flickr changed how it did things. Whether it's a conscious change or it's an architectural change, it broke what she had set up, and she was essentially screwed. She had to rebuild, she had to find another kind of solution. So she essentially built an interactive experience based on the architecture that she didn't control. And it had implications for what she was doing. Now, the point I'm trying to make to you is that you understand the implications of making specific software choices. I'm not suggesting that cultural heritage scholars or institutions stop using these sorts of cloud-based software or software as service types of solutions. Just be mindful about the choices you make. When you say, we're going to use Twitter for something, well, think about what that means. Read the Twitter terms of service. Do some research into what they allow and what they don't allow. Be mindful about the choices that you make. I'm not saying no, I'm just saying think about it. All right, second part of this strategic recommendations focuses on scholarly, cultural, and institutional policy. And like I said, this is the hardest of the two. The technical stuff is easy in comparison. But when you try to influence cultural practice within your discipline, you are going to find you are going to be challenged much, much more. So again, I'm gonna jump around a little bit and focus on some things which I think are particularly important. The things that we can do as individual scholars and as institutions to embrace openness. Now, the thing that you have to realize is I've separated these two out, right? I've said technical issues are separate from the institutional policy and scholarly culture. It's sort of an artificial, the line between those two is really, really fuzzy. And I've separated them out for my own purposes. And you're going to see some sort of more technology-related things show up in this section of the strategic discussion. All right, so what is the first thing that we can all do in order to embrace a more open perspective? For people who publish, for scholars in the room who've published, and you know, scholars, there are scholars everywhere who publish. There are scholars in the academy who publish. There are scholars in museums and libraries and archives and historical societies that publish. Publish in open access venues. Do not, try not, to publish in those predatory, for-profit publishers that gate access to all but the richest institutions and essentially profit on the back of our free labor. This is going to mean some hard decisions. Because as scholars and professional practitioners, and as sort of faculty and professional practitioners, our scholarly output is often, not often, always, measured in publications. And there are far more higher regarded publications that are not open access. So making the choice versus this top tier journal that is closed access and this sort of respectable and you know maybe second string journal that is open access is a really, really hard decision. And you have to be ready to make those. About a year or so ago, there was a new journal in digital cultural heritage that was launched at my professional conference, the Society for American Archaeology conference. And a lot of the sort of the movers and shakers within digital cultural heritage and in digital archaeology specifically, and there are not a lot of us, were asked to submit a paper for the first inaugural journal. And a lot of us said no, because the publisher is Elsevier, which is the most draconian of all of these for-profit publishers. And I suffered because of that. I mean, this was an invitation to publish in what, you know, big journal, lots of money behind it, lots of PR, you know, big publisher. And I turned it down as well as a lot of us, and it hurt me. So you're going to have to make, you know, hard choices. The sort of the silver lining is that, you know, when you, as a scholar within the academy or within an institution, when you are reviewed by, you know, those above you and your publications are reviewed, you have an opportunity to basically say why you did this and make a case for why you did this, why I published here and not here. And you can talk about these open access issues. Be ready to do that. Be ready to argue for the choices that you made. Now, the flip side to this is if you are in a position of power, if you are a chair, you are a dean, you are a provost, you are on a tenure and promotion committee, you are on a professional review committee, reward and recognize open scholarly work. And if you are in a position to fight for more junior people who have embraced a more open model, don't hesitate to do so. Don't hesitate to fight for them, because you will, in many cases, be their greatest ally. And if you're a junior scholar and you're on this side of the equation, you're going to be on this side of the equation sometime. Make absolutely sure that remember the grief that you went through when you were on this side of the equation, when you get to here and fight for those people who are coming up. And basically say that this stuff is important to me as a scholar, and I'm going to fight for it. I also want to see scholars and institutions publishing their data, releasing their data openly. And we talked a little bit about this morning, and there were several sessions where openly available data and research results played a really important role. So publish your research data on the open web. Institutions release collection data on the open web. Now you can do this as a straight download. This is really, really easy, right? You put you export it from your content management system or your digital repository platform, and you make it bulk download. The DPLA does this, where you can get bulk downloads of their entire collection or the various sub-collections. The format is JSON that they download. This is the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology. All of their collections are very, very clean and available in CSV, XML, or JSON. You can get the whole thing, which is a little over 330,000 objects, or you can do it by collection: American, Egyptian, Historic, Mediterranean, European, etc. If you have this, if you are a museum or an archive, do this. And we talked about this morning, and it was really good to see all of the institutions that were sitting up on the panel saying, if we're not doing this now, we really would like to do this. Increasingly, we're seeing scholars and institutions turning to GitHub in order to provide bulk downloads. The Cooper Hewitt, Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt Design Museum is doing this. You go to the Cooper Hewitt website, you scroll down, and it's actually a link to GitHub, where you're downloading all of their data. It's not a direct download from them, but the download is coming from GitHub with all of the version control stuff attached to it. So that's one way you can do it, bulk download. Second way you can do it is APIs, application programming interfaces. This is much more technically sophisticated, certainly, but it's a way for people to build things, applications, mobile, web, whatever, that talk directly to your collection and pull things out and repurpose it and do interesting things with it. This is the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. They have a very, very robust API, an open API, that you can build something that reaches into that, acts as an interface to their collections and pulls things out, whether it's metadata, whether it's actual digital objects, and does interesting things with it. Europeana does this as well, where it has an API that provides access to their collection. So you can build applications, build things, mobile, web, touchscreen, tablet, kiosk, whatever, that pull stuff out of their collections and do really interesting things with it. Third way you can provide access to your data openly is through linked open data. Linked open data and APIs share a lot of the same general sort of functionality, but they're technically different. They technically work in different kind of ways. Show of hands, how many people know what linked open data is? All right, that's good. I'm going to show you a little video on what linked open data is. This is from Europeana.
Linked open data, what is it? And why is it good for you as a memory organization? Put yourself in your user's shoes. Say you want to find out about that painting of Venus standing on a shell. You'd probably search on the word Venus. You'll get lots of results. Venus, Venus, Venus. And after a while, you finally reach the right Venus on an individual website. But what if the web service could help you from the start? First, by disambiguating your search, and then by connecting all kinds of relevant information, updated dynamically within the same web space. Well, linked open data makes this possible. Here's how. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, asked us to put our information as documents on the web, and so we did. Lots of information today is available on lots of individual websites. And then he saw the next step forward. He asked us to put our information on the web as raw data, because raw data can be linked to other data. That generates connections for the user, and puts them in touch with a much richer network of information. But to make that happen, you've got to do 4 things. First, it helps if your data is openly licensed. If it's not open, it's not easily interoperable. Second, you need to put your data on the web in a certain way, so that the connecting links are present in their simplest form. And each of these links is represented using the Resource Description Framework, or RDF triple, because it's in 3 parts. And all these triples will interconnect. Third, when they are online, they need a unique address, a uniform resource identifier. Fourth, you need to put them online following the standard Web Resource Protocol, HTTP. And hey presto, your linked open data can be connected to all other linked open data, creating a rich network of information, making connections you never knew were there, linking knowledge in a way that's never been done before. So why is it good for you and for your users? When other data connects to yours through inbound links, your website rises higher in search engine results, and your data is enriched by all those linkages and is more visible. But also you and others can easily build applications based on your data and the data of others, so you're being found more easily and you're sharing information that's much more complete. And the more useful your information is, the more visitors you get. The more traffic there is, the better your web statistics and performance indicators. Make your trustworthy metadata linked open data while the space is still available. You may become the canonical reference point. We think this is a win-win situation both for users and for memory organizations. The contract that Europeana has with its data providers, the Europeana Data Exchange Agreement, centers on open licensing as a way to facilitate this. This use of open data has been endorsed by the Europeana Foundation, the professional associations representing our memory organizations, so that all our public sector information contributes to the real power of the web.
So linked open data is another really interesting way of providing open access to your data. And one of the places that I always bring up when I'm sort of demonstrating linked open data is this open context. Open context is a platform for data publishing within archaeology. And what you can do is you zoom into, and you can sort of experiment yourself and zoom into collections, and there's collections data within open context, but it also pulls information from other sources. For instance, if you are looking at a jaw from a sheep from a site in Iran, it will pull the taxonomic data from the Encyclopedia of Life, which is it's a biological encyclopedia, and it's doing that programmatically, automatically. That's because Open Context has exposed its data, and the Encyclopedia of Life has exposed its data as well. Now, in theory, either releasing or making available openly licensed data is pretty easy. You know, bulk downloads is simple. Linked open data or APIs are a little more technically challenging, but theoretically speaking, they're fairly easy. The kicker is that the holder of the data, me or you or the institution or whatever, actually has to do it. And when the individual comes into play, you often get situations like this. Right? One does not simply give away your open data freely. This is my Lord of the Rings meme that I promised people. My precious data. Why would I give my data away? My data, I use it to get the gold stars in academia. I use it to publish in peer-reviewed journals. So why would I give my data away freely? Well, I mean, it's a justifiable argument from someone who doesn't quite understand why you release open data and the kind of benefits that it brings you. But around this this idea, there's emerged some interesting new models for data publication. So treating data as a first-class citizen. So essentially, publishing data like you would publish a journal article. This is the Journal of Open Archaeological Data. which is not only an open access journal, but a data journal, where instead of publishing an article, you're publishing a data set. And that data set is peer reviewed, and it's made freely available to everybody else. You get the gold star for the publication because this is a peer-reviewed publication, but you also are making your data available. And they have a workflow where you start off, you register with the journal and start the article. You put your data into a repository. You put your data into a trusted repository. And there are trusted repositories in the United States, in Canada, in Europe. And then you give it a DOI and you submit it for peer review. So someone is peer reviewing your data set, just like they peer review a journal article. Corrections are suggested. There's often some sort of contextual information as well. You add that paper or that sort of contextual data to and the DOI to the repository, and it's published. So it's publishing data sets. So that essentially kind of mitigates my precious data. Now, the important thing here is when you publish your data is that you do it in a useful and a usable way. Make sure your data is cleaned, please, for all, that's holy and good in the world. Don't release garbage data. Do your best to make it useful and usable. The second part of the equation here is licensing. That little video talked about licensing, openly licensing. You have to choose a license that you are comfortable with. The license allows you to control how someone else uses that thing that you have released openly, whether it's a journal article, whether it's collections data, whether it's your own personal data. Creative Commons is often the sort of the go-to licensing scheme for this, and it actually works really, really well. The thing that's important to realize is that the choices you make, the licensing choices you make, have implications. And here is a story from my own experience. So, in 2011, myself and a couple of colleagues published this book. It's called Archaeology 2.0. Openly accessible, free, really embraced all of all this stuff that I've been talking about. Online reading, downloadable PDF. It was in the eScholarship repository, the University of California eScholarship repository. It was published by the Coates and Institute Press, which is a really respected small press in my field. And we worked really, really hard to embrace this openness. And you open up the first page, and there's this massive copyright statement. And we took weeks crafting this thing, and basically justifying why we were releasing this under a Creative Commons by attribution, share alike license. Justifying it all. We felt great with ours. This is a major, we did something good here. We put our money where our mouth was. We released this publication under a very, very copyleft, liberal license. Fast forward about a year. Memphis, Society for American Archaeology conference, our big conference. One of my co-authors and I are, and yes, Memphis actually has a giant glass pyramid in it. One of my co-authors and I were sitting in the book room just sort of hanging out, and we see the editor from that press, who is also a very well-known scholar, and she's this huge German lady. She's as tall as I am. See her coming down the book, and I can tell she's pissed about something. So she comes up, she comes to us, and she said, "Did you get the email?" And we're like, "Email? What?" Well, apparently some guy in the UK took this very liberal license as permission to transform the book, which was only available in PDF, into HTML and sell it. Perfectly permissible by the license. Perfectly permissible. Share alike by attribution. There was no commercial in there. And we did that on purpose. So we're like, oh, so this is what happens when we make these kinds of licensing choices. He was perfectly within his right to do this. It was a transformation. He was changing it. He was doing something different with it. He's turning it into HTML, which adds value. Then he was selling it. Yeah, he could absolutely do that. The problem is that it scared the hell out of the press. They're like, oh, this is what happens. We're never going to do this again, ever again. We're never going to publish a book like this. We're never going to let you do one of these licenses again. So we managed to talk this guy down and basically say, look, you have the right to do this, and we understand this. However, you're going to freak the publisher, and they'll never ever do it again. And he said, okay, I understand. I'll stop doing this. But this is the implications. This is what happens when you choose specific licenses. It's not just an intellectual exercise. Now, in the past few years, there's been a new wrinkle to this issue of content licenses. And it comes courtesy of this project. This is the Mukadu project, which is a collaboration between UC Berkeley and the University of Washington. The PI is a woman named Kim Christensen. And it is basically a content management platform for indigenous collections and indigenous peoples to basically take control of their own collections. The content management system is actually kind of boring. It's based on Drupal. What's interesting is they developed a series of alternative licensing. There are two kinds of licenses, traditional knowledge licenses and traditional knowledge labels. So it's an alternative licensing format that is specifically intended for indigenous peoples and cultural objects, to allow them, those people, to control the way in which their material is disposed. So the TK licenses are actually fairly standard. They're actually quite similar to Creative Commons licenses. They're a little bit tweaked to speak to a different kind of context. And there's 4 of them. There is commercial, no commercial, community outreach, and by attribution. So they're actually quite like the Creative Commons licenses. The TK labels, for instance, are a strategy. They're a way to communicate information about a specific object or specific content that the indigenous people actually, it allows them to say something about the use of their material. And there's 10 of them in total. For instance, this is called TK Women Restricted. So it basically is communicating that this cultural object is for women only. This is TK Secret or Sacred. So it's allowing them to communicate that that cultural object is a sacred object. So it's an information strategy. The final thing I want to talk about, and we're getting near the end here, is openly exposing your scholarly process. I want to see scholars, as well as institutions, expose what they do, how they do, discuss it openly, discuss it transparently. Talk about the process that you go through and what you do in your work. Now, this is hard. Sometimes this is really hard. It's not hard or scary from the technical aspects. There are no real technical aspects to this. But it's often hard because it forces a complete realignment of our scholarly and professional norms and values. As scholars, we're trained to polish our work until it's a shiny gem, and only then we release it. But remember, our old friend Voltaire says, the enemy is the perfect of the good. My dissertation advisor once said to me, listen, Ethan, there are dissertations that are perfect and there are dissertations that are done. I finally did finish. So doing that openly, iterating openly, putting your process openly, not polishing that perfect work only to release it onto the world is very, very healthy because it allows other people to see what you do. and it creates interesting kinds of connections. You also need to put this on the web. It's not just a matter of saying, hey, office mate, this is how I do things, but it's putting it on the web. Because like I said, the web is a giant search engine, or it's a giant discovery engine. And you put stuff on the web, people find stuff. They find what you do. Makes connections. Because remember, we live in this world, right? We all live on little islands. We don't talk to one another, generally speaking. We don't go to the same conferences. We don't publish from the same places. Notice how I gave Anthropology the bigger island? So I can do that on the Keynote. Except for computer science that, anyways, whatever. The sciences are over the horizon somewhere. I don't know. We don't talk to one another that much. These disciplinary boundaries. You put stuff, your process, and what you do, you put it on the web, people find it. It creates connections. It provides opportunity for interdisciplinarity that is becoming the coin of the realm nowadays. When we go for professional reviews, when we go up for grants, you can't get grants as an individual anymore. It just barely ever happens. You get grants because you're doing interdisciplinary, innovative projects. Well, this is one of the ways to create that interdisciplinary connection. Finally, if you have graduate students, talk to your graduate students about this. Talk to your students about these things, because I guarantee you they're not getting it anywhere else. If you are a graduate student, talk to your peers about it. Hell, talk to your professors about it. Create these dialogues around the issue of openness within this domain. Talk to your undergraduates about it. Because these people are going to be the professionals of the world. Get them early. Right, final thoughts, summing up. First one is silos are bad. This is pretty much because I wanted to put a picture of a grain silo up on the screen. The model of openness, collaboration, and sharing is simply not possible in an environment of rigidly and dogmatically enforced silos, intellectual silos, professional silos, systemed silos. Second thing is, the discussion of open versus closed is oftentimes categorized and characterized as old scholars versus new scholars, old school versus new school. Old school are closed and curmudgeonly. New school and new scholars are open. That's not true. Some of the most open scholars that I know within cultural heritage and beyond are very senior, very, very respected. So don't buy into this. Some of the most conservative scholars I know are my peers and younger than me. So this is a fallacy that you should not buy into. The other thing is that openness is not binary. Openness is often presenting as you're either open or you're not. Closed bad, open good. Openness is not binary at all. Instead, openness exists along a spectrum where completely open is on one side and completely closed is on another side. And where you sit on this spectrum is dictated by your individual constraints. Because, and I haven't really talked about this, there are good reasons to be closed. If you are in a museum, for instance, publishing collections data and collections information on sacred objects, that's not a good thing. So having those things closed is a perfectly reasonable reason, or not releasing those things is a perfectly reasonable reason. I just said reason a whole bunch of times in that sentence. So there are reasons why that you want to be mindful about open versus closed, and there are situations where closed is not necessarily a bad thing. So there's that spectrum there. However, I want to be absolutely clear is that open should be the default, and you go from there. Closed shouldn't be the default. So you always start out with an open perspective, and then you negotiate with your own kind of situation to sort of move along that spectrum. You don't start out at closed. Open should be the default. The final thing is that you need to be evangelists yourselves. I mean, and I hope in a certain way throughout this talk, I've given you some sort of fodder and sort of some encouragement to be evangelists yourself for openness within cultural heritage broadly or within your institution. So effectively, with this last slide, I'm passing you the torch. I'm now saying, okay guys, it's your job to go out and be open and argue for this stuff. So thank you very much.